My name is Olivia Chen, and for the past 5 years, I've let my family believe I was nothing more than a receptionist at Sterling Industries, one of the largest technology companies in Boston. The truth? I bought Sterling Industries 3 years ago through my holding company, but let me start from the beginning. I grew up in the shadow of my parents' expectations. The Morgan family name carried weight in Boston's business circles. My father, Richard Morgan, built Morgan Enterprises from the ground up into a respectable mid-sized tech consulting firm. My mother, Diana, came from old money and never let anyone forget it. They had plans for me, Harvard Business School, then a fast-track executive position at Morgan Enterprises, eventually taking over the family legacy. But I had different ideas. "What do you mean you're not applying to Harvard?" My father's voice boomed across our Beacon Hill dining room. I was 18, fresh out of high school, clutching my acceptance letter to MIT's computer science program. "I want to study computer science, Dad, not business administration." My mother's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her wine glass. "Darling, anyone can learn to code. Leadership connections, that's what builds empires." I stood my ground. "Then I'll build something different." That was the first crack in our relationship, but not the last. Throughout college, every choice I made seemed to disappoint them. I took summer internships at tech startups instead of my father's company. I lived in a cramped apartment with roommates rather than our family's Back Bay mansion. I wore hoodies and jeans instead of designer suits. "Look at your cousin Sophia," my mother would say during our increasingly rare family dinners. "Already a junior executive at Goldman Sachs. And here you are, still playing with computers." What they didn't know was that I was already building something. Those worthless coding projects turned into a sophisticated algorithmic trading platform. By my junior year, 3 venture capital firms were fighting to fund my startup. I sold it 2 years after graduation for $40 million. But I never told my family. Instead, I let them believe I was struggling to find my way. I took a job as a receptionist at Sterling Industries, a strategic choice, not a desperate one. Sterling had revolutionary technology but outdated management. I watched, learned, and planned. A receptionist. My father spat the word out during last year's Thanksgiving dinner. "Morgans don't answer phones, Olivia. We own the phones." My mother couldn't even look at me. What would people think? 28 years old and sitting behind a desk checking visitors in. My sister Madison, fresh from her MBA, smirked from across the table. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll restore the family's reputation when I take over Morgan Enterprises." I smiled and passed the cranberry sauce. What they didn't know was that by then, I had already started my holding company, Phoenix Innovations. That $40 million from my first startup had grown to over $300 million through careful investments. Sterling Industries was struggling, their stock price dropping weekly. The board was desperate for a buyout. I bought the company through Phoenix Innovations, using a maze of shell corporations to hide my identity. Only the board knew who really owned Sterling, and they were bound by strict NDAs. To the rest of the world, including my family, I was just Olivia, the quiet receptionist who always arrived early and left late. The real work happened in my private office on the top floor after everyone else had gone home. Nights spent restructuring departments, negotiating international contracts, and steering Sterling from the brink of bankruptcy toward record profits. During the day, I answered phones and greeted visitors, watching as my parents' company, Morgan Enterprises, slowly lost market share to Sterling's innovative new products. "Have you seen Sterling's new software suite?" My father raged one Sunday dinner. "They're undercutting us everywhere. 3 of our biggest clients switched to them last month." Madison leaned forward eagerly. "We should acquire them, Dad. I've been analyzing their financials for my MBA thesis. They're vulnerable." I hid my smile behind my water glass. Sterling's financials were carefully crafted to look weaker than they were. Another strategy I had implemented. "Good thinking, Princess," my father beamed at Madison. "I'll have our acquisition team look into it first thing tomorrow." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "Maybe Madison can find you a proper position once the merger goes through, Olivia. Something more suitable for a Morgan." "That's kind of you, Mom," I said softly, thinking of the meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Morgan Enterprises' acquisition team would be walking into my office, my real office, to discuss their proposal. They had no idea they were about to meet the real CEO of Sterling Industries. That night, I stayed late in my private office, reviewing the documents one last time. The morning would change everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "Don't be late for work tomorrow, sis. Wouldn't want you to miss greeting the Morgan Enterprises team. Maybe you can get their coffee orders right." I placed my phone face down on my desk and walked to the window. The Boston skyline glittered in the darkness, lights twinkling like stars. Tomorrow, years of careful planning would finally come to fruition. Tomorrow, my family would learn that while they were busy mocking my choices, I had built something beyond their imagination. Tomorrow, they would discover that the failure they had dismissed was actually their biggest competitor. I picked up my phone and typed a reply to Madison. "Don't worry, I wouldn't miss tomorrow for anything." The next morning, I arrived at Sterling Industries wearing my usual receptionist attire. A simple black dress and minimal jewelry. My designer suit, the one I wore for board meetings, hung in my private office upstairs. I settled behind the reception desk, booting up the computer as the early morning sun streamed through the lobby's glass walls. At precisely 9:15 a.m., the Morgan Enterprises team strode through the front doors. My father led the group, his custom Italian suit a stark contrast to my modest dress. Madison walked beside him, practically bouncing with excitement. Behind them trailed their chief financial officer and two junior executives. "Good morning," I greeted them professionally. "Welcome to Sterling Industries." My father barely glanced at me. "Morgan Enterprises, here for the 9:30 meeting." Madison couldn't resist. "Oh look, Olivia's actually on time today. Would you be a dear and let them know we're here?" Her voice dripped with condescension. I typed something into my computer, maintaining my calm demeanor. "Of course. Please take the express elevator to the top floor. Ms. Phoenix will meet you there." "Ms. Phoenix?" My father frowned. "I thought we were meeting with the board." "Ms. Phoenix is the CEO and majority owner," I explained. "She handles all major acquisitions personally." Madison scoffed. "Since when does Sterling have a female CEO?" "My research never mentioned that." "Since 3 years ago," I replied, handing them visitor badges. "She prefers to maintain a low profile." They headed toward the elevator, Madison whispering loudly enough for me to hear. "Maybe you could learn something from this Miss Phoenix, Olivia. Though I doubt you'd understand any of it." I waited until the elevator doors closed before standing. I had exactly 12 minutes to transform from Olivia the receptionist into Alexandra Phoenix, CEO of Sterling Industries. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I took the private elevator to my office. 11 minutes later, I stood before my office mirror, adjusting the jacket of my Tom Ford suit. My hair was swept up into an elegant chignon, subtle makeup perfected. A pair of diamond earrings, my first purchase after selling my startup, blinked in my ears. The transformation was complete. My assistant, Sarah, one of the few people who knew my dual identity, appeared at my door. "They're in the conference room. Your father's getting impatient." I smiled. "Let them wait another 5 minutes." At precisely 9:35 a.m., I walked into the conference room. The effect was immediate. My father stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. Madison's perfect posture crumpled. The other executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Good morning," I said, my voice carrying the authority I hidden for years. "I'm Alexandra Phoenix. Welcome to Sterling Industries. Olivia?" Madison's voice was barely a whisper. I took my seat at the head of the table, enjoying the shocked silence. "Shall we discuss your acquisition proposal?" My father found his voice first. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "Not at all, Mr. Morgan." I opened the folder in front of me. "Though I should inform you that your proposal is essentially dead on arrival. Sterling Industries isn't for sale." Madison's face had turned an interesting shade of red. But you're a receptionist." Actually, I met her eyes across the table. "I own Sterling Industries. The receptionist role was merely a convenient cover while I restructured the company." "Impossible," my father growled. "You couldn't possibly have the resources." I slid financial statements across the table. Sterling's current market value is $2.8 billion. My holding company, Phoenix Innovations, acquired it 3 years ago for $400 million. Since then, we've tripled revenue and expanded into 17 new markets. The color drained from my father's face as he scanned the documents. "Phoenix Innovations. That's the company that's been buying up tech startups across the Northeast. Among other things, I nodded. We also own significant shares in various technology and innovation companies, including, as of last week, a 15% stake in Morgan Enterprises. Madison's designer purse clattered to the floor. That's not possible. We would have known. Would you? I raised an eyebrow. The same way you knew what your sister was building while you were busy mocking her career choices. My father's hands trembled slightly as he set down the papers. Why? Why this deception? Because you never would have taken me seriously otherwise. I stood walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every choice I made, every path I chose that didn't align with your vision, you dismissed it all. So I built something bigger than you could imagine, right under your nose. But the receptionist job, Madison's voice was small now, was the perfect cover. Who notices the receptionist? Who thinks twice about the quiet girl at the front desk? You certainly never did. I turned back to face them. While you were busy planning how to acquire Sterling, I was busy making it too valuable for you to touch. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at his hands, shoulders slumped. Madison looked like she might cry. The other executives were doing their best to become invisible. Now, I returned to my seat. Let's discuss the real reason I called this meeting. Morgan Enterprises is losing market share. Your technology is outdated, and your management structure is inefficient. My father's head snapped up. We're not here to be lectured by your failure, daughter. I cut him off. No, you're here because your company needs help, and I'm offering it. Not an acquisition, a partnership. Sterling's innovation combined with Morgan's client base. But on my terms. Madison leaned forward. What terms? Sterling maintains majority control. Morgan Enterprises gets access to our technology and research facilities. You get to keep your company, but with significant restructuring. And if we refuse, my father's voice was tight. I shrugged. Then we continue as competitors. But given that we already own 15% of your shares and your 3 biggest clients are in talks to switch to Sterling, well, I'll let you do the math. The next hour was a blur of terms, conditions, and wounded pride. By the time they left, the basic framework of a deal was in place. Morgan Enterprises would survive, but not as the company my father had built. Things would change significantly. As they stood to leave, Madison paused at the door. Why didn't you tell us about any of it? Would you have believed me? I asked quietly, or would you have found a way to dismiss it like everything else I've done? She had no answer. My father was the last to leave. He stood at my office door, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I don't understand, he said finally. How did we not see it? Because you saw what you expected to see, I replied. A disappointment, a failure, never once considering that I might be capable of more. He nodded slowly, then walked out without another word. I waited until their car had left the parking lot before changing back into my receptionist clothes. There would be questions, rumors, discussions about the mysterious Ms. Phoenix and her true identity. But for now, I had a company to run, 2 companies actually. That evening, as I sat in my private office reviewing the partnership agreement, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Are you coming to Sunday dinner this week? I smiled, thinking of the changes ahead. Yes, I replied. But I think it's time we had a real conversation about my career. The next day, I arrived at Sterling Industries exactly on time, greeting employees with my usual quiet smile. But something had shifted, not in me, but in how I felt about my dual role. The receptionist desk was no longer a cover story, but a reminder of an important truth. Success doesn't always wear designer suits or announce itself loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly at the front desk, watching, learning, and building empires while others aren't looking. 3 months later, the partnership between Sterling and Morgan was finalized. My father still runs Morgan Enterprises, but now he reports to a board that I chair. Madison works in Sterling's innovation department, learning what it really takes to build something meaningful. My mother has stopped comparing me to other people's children. And me? I still spend a few hours each week at the reception desk. Not because I have to, but because it reminds me of an important lesson. Never judge someone's worth either title. The quiet one in the corner, the one everyone overlooks, they might just be the one running the whole show. The nameplate on my office door now reads Alexandra Phoenix, Olivia Morgan. A reminder that success doesn't mean forgetting who you are or where you came from. It means proving that greatness can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Last week, during a board meeting, my father actually asked for my advice on a strategic decision. Madison brought me coffee without being asked. Small changes, perhaps, but significant ones. They're learning slowly that titles and appearances don't define capability. As for me, I'm exactly where I want to be. Running my companies, building something meaningful, and showing the world that sometimes the biggest achievements come from the people everyone else underestimated. The receptionist desk still sits in the lobby, and sometimes when I pass by it, I smile. It reminds me that every great success story has a beginning, and sometimes that beginning looks nothing like what others expect. My story isn't about revenge or proving my family wrong. It's about proving myself right. About building something extraordinary while others were busy judging the surface. After all, isn't that the sweetest success of all? I adjusted my $20 thrift store blazer and took my usual seat at the back of the Harrison Financial Group's weekly staff meeting. As always, my cousin Peter barely acknowledged my presence, too busy adjusting his Rolex and bragging about his latest deal. Another billion-dollar merger, he announced to the admiring junior analysts. That makes 3 this year. Not bad for someone who just turned 35. I hid my smile behind my coffee cup. If only they knew that their small-time consultant had orchestrated those deals from the shadows, using Peter's ego against him every step of the way. I'm Olivia Harrison, though most people at the firm know me as Liv Parker, the quiet consultant who handles minor accounts from a cramped cubicle on the 14th floor. What they don't know is that I'm also Elizabeth Stone, the reclusive CEO of Stone Global Investments, one of the most powerful investment firms in the world. Liv. Peter's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. Those quarterly reports better be on my desk by noon, and try to make them comprehensible this time. I nodded meekly, playing my role perfectly. Yes, Mr. Harrison. 10 years ago, I would have snapped back at him. But that was before I learned the power of being underestimated. The story of how I ended up hiding my success from my own family starts with another meeting, a decade ago, in this same conference room. I was 25, fresh out of my MBA program with honors, eager to prove myself in the family business. Investment strategy isn't about flashy deals, I tried explaining to Uncle Robert, Peter's father and the firm's CEO at the time. It's about identifying undervalued assets, understanding market psychology. Leave the real analysis to people who understand it, Peter interrupted. Why don't you stick to organizing client files? That seems more your speed. Uncle Robert nodded in agreement. Olivia, your father was a dreamer too. Look where that got him. My father, James Harrison, had died when I was 12. He'd been the black sheep of the family, more interested in building something meaningful than chasing quick profits. The official story was that he'd failed at starting his own investment firm. Only I knew the truth. He'd been on the verge of a breakthrough when the car accident took him. That day, watching Peter and Uncle Robert dismiss my ideas just like I dismissed my father's, something shifted inside me. I realized that as long as I carried the Harrison name, I'd never be taken seriously. So I made a decision. That evening, I withdrew my life savings, a modest $50,000 from years of careful saving, and registered a new company, Stone Global Investments. The name was a tribute to my grandmother on my mother's side, Eleanor Stone, who'd always believed in me. For appearances, I kept my junior position at Harrison Financial. But every night, in my tiny studio apartment, I built something extraordinary. The first year was brutal. I worked 80-hour weeks, managing Harrison's small accounts during the day and building Stone Global at night. I developed an algorithm for identifying undervalued companies, something my father had been working on before his death. I refined it, modernized it, made it better. My big break came when I spotted a pattern in the Asian markets that everyone else had missed. While Peter was bragging about his latest yacht purchase, I was quietly orchestrating a series of small but strategic investments through Stone Global. Within 6 months, those investments tripled in value. I kept my success hidden, living simply and reinvesting every penny back into the company. Stone Global grew rapidly, but I maintained absolute secrecy about my identity. I hired brilliant people who shared my vision, building a corporate culture focused on intelligence and integrity rather than flashy deals and office politics. "Did you hear?" Lisa from accounting whispered one morning, stopping by my cubicle. "Stone Global just acquired Pacific Tech. They're saying it's the biggest deal of the year." I looked up from my intentionally messy desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups and post-it notes. "Really? That's interesting." What Lisa didn't know was that I finalized that deal at 3 a.m. from my home office, a converted walk-in closet in my deliberately modest apartment. The acquisition had added another $1 billion to Stone Global's portfolio. "I don't understand why you live like this," Lisa said, gesturing at my shabby blazer. "You've been here 10 years. You should at least ask for a raise." I shrugged. "I'm comfortable where I am." Comfortable wasn't the word. I was thriving. While Peter and the other executives focused on their public image, I was building something revolutionary. Stone Global wasn't just about making money. We were reshaping entire industries, but always from behind the scenes. The company's success meant I could have bought a mansion or a fleet of luxury cars. Instead, I maintained my simple lifestyle, finding satisfaction in watching my clueless family members quote Elizabeth Stone as their role model. "Now that's a woman who understands business," Uncle Robert once said during a board meeting, holding up a Forbes article about Stone Global's latest success. "Not like some people who waste time with theoretical strategies." He looked pointedly at me as he said it. I ducked my head to hide my smile, remembering how I'd given that Forbes interview over video call, using subtle makeup and lighting to disguise my features. But maintaining two identities wasn't easy. I had to be careful about every detail. My apartment, while small, had a hidden room filled with secure servers and communication equipment. My sick days at Harrison Financial coincided with Stone Global's board meetings. I even maintained 2 distinct wardrobes: thrift store finds for Liv Parker, custom-tailored suits for the rare occasions when Elizabeth Stone had to make a public appearance. The double life took its toll. Sometimes I longed to stand up in a Harrison Financial meeting and reveal who I really was, to see the shock on their faces. But I knew the power of patience. I was waiting for the perfect moment. That moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. Last week, Peter had burst into the office, practically glowing with excitement. "We're about to close the biggest deal in company history," he announced. "A merger with Anderson Corp, $10 billion. What he didn't know was that Stone Global owned a controlling interest in Anderson Corp. The merger would only go through with Elizabeth Stone's approval. For 10 years, I'd watched Peter take credit for others' work, belittle anyone he saw as beneath him, and manipulate his way up the corporate ladder. I'd built my empire in secret, working twice as hard to prove that success doesn't have to come at the cost of integrity. Now finally, everything was coming full circle. The merger meeting was scheduled for next week. Peter, Uncle Robert, and the entire Harrison Financial Board would be there, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the mysterious Elizabeth Stone. Little did they know that their moment of reckoning would come from the person they'd underestimated the most. I glanced at my watch, almost time for another tedious staff meeting. I gathered my notably disorganized files, straightened my intentionally unfashionable blazer, and practiced my well-worn expression of quiet insecurity. "Parker." Peter's voice boomed across the office. "Where are those reports?" "Right here, Mr. Harrison." I called back meekly, hiding my growing anticipation. One more week. After a decade of building my empire in secret, I was finally ready to step out of the shadows. The look on their faces would be worth every moment of hiding, every condescending comment, every dismissive glance. But first, I had a merger to prepare for, one that would change everything. The morning of the merger meeting, I arrived at work as Liv Parker for the last time. My usual shabby blazer was carefully pressed, my hair intentionally unstyled. No one at Harrison Financial gave me a second glance as I made my way to my cubicle. "Big day," Lisa whispered, stopping by my desk. "Everyone's talking about meeting the mysterious Elizabeth Stone." I nodded, hiding my smile. "I heard she's very particular about deals." Peter was already in full peacock mode, strutting around the office in a new Italian suit. "Elizabeth Stone is going to love what we've put together," he announced to anyone who would listen. "This merger will be the crown jewel of both our companies." If he only knew. At 9 a.m., I made a show of gathering my files. "Mr. Harrison," I called out meekly, "I'm not feeling well. Might need to take the rest of the day off." Peter barely looked up. "Whatever." Just make sure those reports are done first. I headed to the elevator, but instead of going down to the lobby, I went up to the private penthouse suite where I kept my Elizabeth Stone identity hidden. Within 30 minutes, I had transformed. Gone was the shabby blazer, replaced by a perfectly tailored Armani suit. My hair was elegantly styled, my makeup flawless but subtle. The merger meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:55, I watched through the penthouse's one-way glass as the Harrison Financial Board members filed into the main conference room. Peter was practically bouncing with excitement. Uncle Robert kept checking his Rolex. My phone buzzed. A message from my executive assistant at Stone Global. Cars waiting at the private entrance. Ready when you are. I took a deep breath, thinking of my father. He had always taught me that true success wasn't about crushing others, but about proving your worth through actions rather than words. At exactly 2 p.m., I stepped into the conference room through the private entrance. The effect was immediate. Every head turned, eyes widening at the sight of Elizabeth Stone in the flesh. "Gentlemen," I said smoothly, my voice carrying none of Liv Parker's artificial meekness. "Shall we begin?" Peter jumped up, hand extended. "Miss Stone, I'm Peter Harrison. We spoke on the phone about the Anderson Corp merger," I finished, ignoring his outstretched hand. "Yes, I'm well aware of your enthusiastic pursuit of this deal." Uncle Robert leaned forward. "We've prepared a comprehensive presentation demonstrating the synergies between our companies." I sat down at the head of the table, opening a sleek leather portfolio. "That won't be necessary. I've already reviewed everything. In fact, I've been reviewing Harrison Financial's operations for quite some time." Something in my tone made Peter's smile falter slightly. "Your company's approach to business is," I paused deliberately, "interesting. Taking credit for others' work, manipulating market positions, belittling talented people because they don't fit your narrow view of success." The room grew very quiet. "I don't understand," Peter said, his confidence cracking. "We've always operated with the highest standards." "Really?" I pulled out a file. "Like when you claimed credit for the Asian market strategy that was actually developed by a junior analyst? Or when you push up talented employees because they threaten your position?" Uncle Robert's face had grown pale. "Miss Stone, I assure you, don't." I held up my hand. "Save your assurances for someone who hasn't watched your operation from the inside for the past decade." Confusion crossed their faces. Then slowly, terribly, recognition began to dawn in Uncle Robert's eyes. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." I smiled, reaching up to remove the contact lenses that had slightly altered my eye color. "Hello, Uncle Robert." "Peter. Surprised to see your small-time consultant on this side of the table." Peter's face went from red to white to red again. "Olivia. But you can't be." "Elizabeth Stone, the CEO of the company you've been desperately trying to impress." I leaned back in my chair. Have been for 10 years, while you were all too busy looking down your noses at Liv Parker to notice what I was building." The board members were exchanging stunned glances. Some looked horrified, others oddly impressed. "This is impossible," Peter sputtered. "You're nothing but a—" "Careful." I cut him off. "You're about to insult the person who controls the fate of your $10 billion merger." That shut him up. I opened another file. "Let's talk about what's really going to happen here. Stone Global isn't going to approve this merger, at least not as it stands." "You can't do this." Uncle Robert finally found his voice. "The shareholders will be very interested to learn how Harrison Financial has been operating," I finished. "Unless, of course, we can reach a different arrangement." For the next hour, I laid out my terms. Harrison Financial would undergo a complete restructuring. Peter and Uncle Robert would step down from their executive positions. The company would implement new policies focusing on merit rather than connections. "You've been planning this for years," Uncle Robert said quietly. "No," I corrected him. "I've been building something meaningful for years. This is just the natural conclusion." As they filed out of the conference room, thoroughly defeated, Peter paused at the door. "Why did you hide for so long? Why work here as her?" I thought about all the lessons I'd learned watching from the shadows. Because sometimes the best way to understand a broken system is to experience it from the bottom. Everything I built at Stone Global came from watching how not to run a company. The news broke the next morning. The business world was shocked to discover that the reclusive Elizabeth Stone was actually Olivia Harrison. and that Stone Global had engineered a complete takeover of Harrison Financial. Our stock price soared. Apparently, the market loved the idea of a self-made billionaire who had built her empire while working undercover in her own family's company. I kept my old cubicle's nameplate as a reminder. It sits on my desk in the CEO's office, now relocated to the top floor of what used to be Harrison Financial's building. Lisa stopped by last week, still processing the revelation. All those times I told you to ask for a raise. I laughed. Consider yourself promoted. I need people who saw value in Liv Parker, not just Elizabeth Stone. Peter and Uncle Robert both retired to spend time with family. I hear Peter's writing a book about learning humility. I doubt it'll be very accurate, but at least he's finally doing his own work. As for me, I finally bought myself a new blazer, but I keep the old one hanging in my office as a reminder that success isn't about appearances or titles. It's about what you build when no one's watching. The company's doing better than ever. Turns out, when you promote people based on talent rather than last names, amazing things happen. We've launched a mentorship program for overlooked employees, giving them the chances I never got. Sometimes, walking through the office late at night, I think about my father. He believed in building something meaningful, something that would last. I think he'd be proud to know that his daughter did exactly that, even if she had to do it in secret. Last month, a young analyst made a brilliant presentation about market inefficiencies. Peter would have dismissed her immediately. Wrong family, wrong background, wrong everything. Instead, she's now leading our newest division. You saw something in me that others missed, she said when I gave her the promotion. No, I corrected her. I saw you. Sometimes that's all people need, someone who actually looks past the surface. The merger? We eventually approved a modified version that protected jobs and prioritized innovation over quick profits. The business papers called it a masterclass in strategic thinking. I called it justice. My father's old desk now sits in my office, restored and proudly displayed. On it, I keep two nameplates side by side. Elizabeth Stone, CEO, and Liv Parker, consultant. They're both me after all. Just like success has many faces, often hidden from those too proud to look closely. When people ask me if I regret spending 10 years in hiding, I think about everything I learned. Every dismissive comment taught me how to treat employees better. Every stolen credit showed me the importance of recognizing talent. Every moment of underestimation became fuel for building something greater. So no, I don't regret it. Sometimes the best empires are built in secret, by the people everyone else is too blind to see. Besides, the look on Peter's face was worth every minute. The annual Parker family reunion was in full swing at my aunt's sprawling estate when my cousin Madison's voice cut through the chatter. Oh look, Olivia finally made it. Still working as a secretary, sweetie. I smoothed down my simple black dress, Chanel, though they'd never recognize that, and forced a smile. If only they knew that tomorrow morning I'd be signing the papers to acquire both Madison's tech startup and my other cousin Trevor's investment firm. Still at Thomson Corp, I replied quietly, accepting a glass of champagne. The same Thomson Corporation that I secretly own through a complex web of shell companies and private equity firms. I'm Olivia Parker, though in certain circles I'm known as OP Holdings, one of the most aggressive and successful private equity investors in the country. But to my family, I'm just the disappointing cousin who never lived up to her potential. Trevor, dressed in an expensive but poorly fitted suit, clapped me on the shoulder. You know, Liv, I could probably find you something better. My firm is always looking for good administrative support. I sipped my champagne to hide my smile. His firm, Parker Capital, was already mine, he just didn't know it yet. I'd spent the last year quietly buying up shares through various shell companies. That's so kind of you, I said mildly, watching him preen at his own generosity. 8 years ago, when our grandfather passed away, everyone expected his fortune to be split equally among his grandchildren. Instead, he left specific bequests. Trevor got his investment firm, Madison received seed money for her tech startup, and I got what everyone thought was the booby prize. His old office downtown, and a modest trust of $250,000. Poor Olivia, they'd whispered at the well reading. She always was his favorite. Shame he didn't leave her something more substantial. What they didn't know was that Grandpa's modest office building sat on top of old property records worth millions. He'd spent years quietly acquiring land rights and mineral claims across the city. More importantly, he taught me everything he knew about building wealth quietly, patiently, without drawing attention. "You're like me, Olivia," he'd said during our secret Sunday afternoon lessons. "You understand that true power doesn't need to announce itself." Now, watching my family mingle in their designer clothes and flash their expensive watches, I thought about how right he'd been. Every one of them had squandered their inheritances on visible displays of wealth, while I had turned my worthless office building into an empire. "Olivia, darling," my Aunt Patricia swooped in, air kissing my cheek. "We missed you at the country club last weekend." Madison was telling us all about her company's latest success. Madison preened. "We just closed another round of funding. $10 million. Not that you'd understand the complexities of tech investment, Olivia." I thought about the documents waiting on my desk, showing how her company had actually lost money for the third quarter in a row. The $10 million was a desperate attempt to keep the lights on. And tomorrow, she'd learn that the mysterious investor behind the fund was me. "Sounds fascinating," I murmured. Trevor jumped in, never one to let his cousin hog the spotlight. "Parker Capital just acquired 3 new startups. We're projecting billion-dollar returns by next quarter." I knew better. His firm was hemorrhaging money, making increasingly risky investments to cover mounting debts. That's why my quiet takeover had been so easy. Desperate people make careless decisions. "How wonderful for you both," I said, meaning it more than they knew. Their desperation had played perfectly into my plans. My cousin Ethan, the family's self-appointed financial guru, wandered over. "Still pushing papers at Thompson, Liv? You know, it's never too late to make something of yourself. Look at Madison and Trevor. They're out there building empires." If he only knew that the papers I pushed included acquisition documents for half the properties in downtown Boston. That Thompson Corp., under my secret leadership, had quietly become one of the largest property holders in 3 states. "We can't all be entrepreneurs," I said softly, thinking of the network of companies I controlled through OP Holdings. My empire made their ventures look like corner lemonade stands. The afternoon wore on, a parade of subtle digs and condescending advice. I sat through it all, playing my part as the quiet underachiever. Even when my mother joined in, lamenting how I'd wasted my business degree by becoming a secretary, I maintained my calm facade. "Have you even tried to advance your career?" she asked, concern dripping from every word. "I'm sure Trevor could help. He's doing so well with Grandpa's old firm." I thought about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, where Trevor would learn that his firm's mysterious majority shareholder was his underachieving cousin. "I'm comfortable where I am, Mom." Madison, overhearing, laughed. "Comfortable? Oh, honey, you should want more than comfortable. My company's about to revolutionize the tech industry. We're raising another round of funding next month." From OP Holdings, Trevor cut in. "They're the biggest player in private equity right now. Very mysterious, but they seem interested in both our companies." I hid my smile behind my champagne glass. OP Holdings, my careful construction of shell companies and private trusts, had spent years building a reputation for aggressive but anonymous acquisitions. Tomorrow, the mystery would end. "I've heard of them," I said carefully. "Quite the portfolio they're building." As if he'd know anything about high-level business dealings, Madison sniffed. "Stick to filing papers, Liv. Leave the real business to those of us who understand it." Before I could respond, my aunt called everyone to dinner. I found myself seated between Trevor and Madison, listening to them compete over who had the more impressive business empire. "Parker Capital is about to close the biggest deal in our history," Trevor boasted, cutting into his steak. "Once OP Holdings signs on, we'll be unstoppable." Madison rolled her eyes. "Please, my tech platform is going to make your traditional investment firm look prehistoric. In fact, OP Holdings is more interested in my company than yours." If they only knew that both their companies were already mine, their futures decided in quiet meetings and careful legal maneuvers over the past year. Speaking of business, my mother chimed in from across the table. "Olivia, dear, have you thought about taking some night classes? Maybe get an MBA? It's not too late to start a real career." I thought about my real office, the one no one in my family had ever seen, with its view of the city skyline and the wall of acquisitions that had built my fortune. "I'm fine where I am, Mom." "That's the problem with you," Live, Trevor said, shaking his head. No ambition. No drive. Grandpa would be so disappointed. I touched the small key I wore on a chain around my neck, the key to Grandpa's old office, where I'd started building my empire. I think Grandpa understood me better than you know. The conversation shifted to the latest family gossip, but I caught bits and pieces of Trevor and Madison's worried whispers. Both were counting on tomorrow's meeting with OP Holdings to save their struggling companies. Neither suspected that their savior in their downfall would be the cousin they'd spent years underestimating. As the evening wound down, I made my excuses to leave early. Big day at work tomorrow, I said, prompting more condescending smiles. Don't work too hard filing those papers, Madison called after me, laughing at her own joke. In my car, a modest Audi that concealed its armored exterior, I called my assistant. Is everything ready for tomorrow? Yes, Ms. Parker. The contracts are prepared and the board members have been notified. Your cousin's companies won't know what hit them. I drove home to my penthouse apartment, decorated not with showy artwork like Madison's place or pretentious antiques like Trevor's, but with the simple elegance Grandpa had taught me to appreciate. In my home office, I reviewed the documents one last time. Tomorrow, OP Holdings would reveal its true identity, and my family would learn that their underachieving cousin had built something far greater than they could imagine. I picked up the photo on my desk, the last one taken of Grandpa and me in his office. He was smiling that knowing smile of his, the one that said he saw something in me that others missed. The best success, he used to say, is the kind they never see coming until it's too late. Tomorrow, my family would understand exactly what he meant. The morning after the reunion, I arrived at the Thompson Corp headquarters early, not in my usual secretary attire, but in a custom-made power suit that cost more than Madison's car. My assistant, Sarah, met me in the private elevator. Both your cousins are already here, she reported, a slight smile playing on her lips. Madison's been asking for coffee every 10 minutes, and Trevor's pacing the conference room like a caged animal. Nervous habits, I observed. They know their companies are in trouble. They just don't know how much. The conference room occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Trevor and Madison sat on opposite sides of the massive table, both trying to look confident and failing. Their lawyers flanked them, looking considerably more concerned. What's she doing here? Madison demanded when I walked in. This is a private meeting with OP Holdings. Trevor nodded. Olivia, I know you mean well, but this is far beyond your understanding. Why don't you get us some coffee while we wait for the real executives? I set my briefcase on the table, enjoying the moment. Actually, I think you'll find I understand the situation perfectly. Sarah began distributing folders to everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, please review the documents before you. You'll find complete documentation of OP Holdings' ownership of both Parker Capital and Madison Tech, along with the proposed merger terms. The color drained from Trevor's face as he read. Madison's hands began to shake. This has to be a mistake, she whispered. OP Holdings is, your... Olivia Parker, I finished for her, taking my seat at the head of the table. Founder and CEO of OP Holdings, majority shareholder of Thompson Corp., and as of this morning, the new owner of both your companies. Trevor slammed his hand on the table. This is impossible. You're a secretary. No, I corrected him. I let you believe I was a secretary. Just like I let you believe Grandpa's old office building was worthless. Just like I let you both think your companies were still yours to control. But my tech platform, Madison stammered, has been losing money for 3 quarters straight, I finished. The only reason you got that last round of funding was because I arranged it through one of my subsidiary investment firms. Trevor was frantically flipping through the documents. Parker Capital, my father's company, has been mine for months, I said quietly. Those risky investments you've been making to cover your losses. I've been buying up the debt, positioning myself for this moment. My mother burst into the room, followed by several other family members, clearly summoned by panicked texts from Trevor and Madison. What's going on? Why are Trevor and Madison saying something about Olivia and OP Holdings? Perfect timing, I said, standing up. Sarah, please show them the presentation. The wall screen came to life, displaying a complex web of companies, investments, and acquisitions, my true empire. built quietly over 8 years while my family thought I was just pushing papers. OP Holdings, I explained to my stunned relatives, currently controls over $500 million in assets across real estate, technology, and private equity. That includes Thomson Corp, Parker Capital, Madison Tech, and about 30 other companies you've never heard of. But how? My mother whispered. Remember Grandpa's worthless office building, the one you all pitied me for inheriting? It came with property rights and mineral claims worth millions. While you were all busy showing off your success, I was building something real. Madison found her voice, anger replacing shock. You deceived us. All those family gatherings, playing the quiet little secretary, like you played the successful tech entrepreneur. I countered, pretending your company wasn't drowning in debt. Or Trevor, bragging about Parker Capital's deals while taking increasingly desperate risks to stay afloat. We were building something, Trevor protested. No, I corrected him. You were playing at building something. You were so busy looking successful that you forgot to actually create success. I turned to the lawyers. Now shall we discuss the terms of the merger? Both companies will be restructured under the OP Holdings umbrella. Current management will be reviewed. You can't do this, Madison whispered. Actually, I can. And I did. While you were all laughing at the quiet secretary, I was learning every aspect of business from the ground up. I was making connections, building relationships, understanding how real power works. My mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me, or would you have tried to take control, just like you did with every other aspect of my life? I opened my briefcase and pulled out an old photograph. Grandpa in his office, teaching me about property rights and quiet power. Grandpa knew what he was doing when he left me that worthless building. He knew I'd understand its real value. The next few hours were a blur of contracts, negotiations, and restructuring plans. By the end, both Madison and Trevor had to admit their companies needed the stability OP Holdings could provide. Their pride was bruised, but their jobs, at least for now, were secure. As the lawyers filed out, my mother lingered. All these years, she said softly, we thought we were the successful ones. Success doesn't always need to announce itself. I replied, remembering Grandpa's words. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most powerful. Over the next few months, things changed dramatically. Madison's tech platform, with proper management and funding, actually began to show promise. Trevor, stripped of his CEO title but retained as an investment advisor, finally started learning the business properly instead of just playing at it. The family dynamics shifted too. The condescending comments stopped. The pitying looks disappeared. At the next family gathering, when someone asked about my work, they listened, really listened, for the first time. My little office building, I kept it, renovating Grandpa's old office, but leaving his desk exactly where it had always been. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit there and remember his lessons about quiet power and patient success. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I found Trevor waiting in the lobby. I've been thinking, he said, looking humbled. All those years we spent competing, showing off, we missed what Grandpa was really trying to teach us. I smiled, touching the key I still wore around my neck. What was that? That real success isn't about looking powerful. It's about being powerful. And you built an empire while we were just playing pretend. I thought about all the family dinners, all the condescending comments, all the years of being underestimated. Wanting of the real secret, Trevor? He nodded eagerly. Success doesn't need an audience. It just needs patience, wisdom, and the strength to keep going when everyone else thinks you're failing. As I walked back to my car that night, I looked up at the city skyline, my skyline, though few people knew it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. Sometimes it's proving yourself right, quietly and completely, until they have no choice but to see the truth that was there all along. And sometimes, just sometimes, that truth comes with a $500 million empire and the sweetest vindication of all. Success on your own terms.